Actually, I'm studying cartography now, the mapping of uncharted territory.
These are facilities maps. Whenever possible, I try to do my paintings on a facility map. This is a trail map. In a pinch, I suppose I would do a painting on a trail map if I couldn't access a facilities map. San Jacinto has a facilities map. It even has the Texas Park and Wildlife logo in the corner, so you might expect to see it on the official Texas Parks and Wildlife map, but it isn't there. Some state parks are both a state park and a state historic site.
I do cartography.
Why the map lesson? Well, today I'm at Fort Leaton State Historic Site, but the sign seems to link it as an entry point simply to Big Bend Ranch State Park. So I'm at a loss. Do I paint it as its own state park, or do I count it as an entry to another state park, Big Bend Ranch? To complicate the matter, my Texas State Parks Pass doesn't give me entry to Fort Leaton State Historic Site. So I decided I'm going to split the difference. I will paint Fort Leaton, but I won't do it on site. I will not paint Barton Warnock Visitor Center on the other side of Big Bend Ranch, just because I'm not sure it counts as a state park. But Fort Leaton is a very cool site if you ever get a chance to visit. It's well preserved, it's informative, you get to see a day in the life of someone from that time period, and it's got all sorts of little nooks and crannies that are just beautiful and interesting that I would love to paint. Honestly, I thought the carreta would be a surefire winner for my painting, just because it's hard to tell from a static shot, but with context, it's massive. It's a really cool object, and yet I looked around, I took lots of pictures and videos, and saw all sorts of cool sights. It was really hard for me to decide what to paint. After giving it some thought, I decided not to paint the landscape, nor would I paint an object within the fort, although like I said, the cart was cool, kind of reminded me of this Kayabot painting of a hay cart. But I chose instead to focus on the emptiness of the fort as I was there, and it reminded me of a different artist, Wilhelm Hammershoi. Known for his haunting and desolate interiors, Hammershoi is a Danish artist, and as luck would have it, at the airing of this video, I am in Scandinavia, able to see Hammershoi work in person. I thought it might be really cool then to bring that sensibility to a Texas state park. So today's palette is going to be zinc white, yellow ochre light, cadmium yellow lemon, burnt sienna, cobalt teal, just a little touch of that, ultramarine deep, and ivory black. And these are the key mixtures that are going to go on first in the largest areas and sort of quickly, maybe a little bit more thin. This is black and white with just a little bit of yellow ochre light. So it's a gray that's been warmed up a little bit. These pools of colors relate to the doors and the shutters. They're that warm wood receiving the warm light. And sometimes it's a little bit cooler. So that's more burnt sienna. That's a pretty decent balance of burnt sienna and yellow ochre light. And then this has a little bit more white, but also some of that burnt sienna darker mixture in there. So that'll be a little bit more varied. And then the floor is a version of this gray that's been mixed, but it has more ultramarine blue to give it that sky reflected light. And yet it's been dulled down with burnt sienna. So it's a little purpley, you could say, but it's just not quite as intense as you see in some of those areas of the mixture. Any architectural or interior scene really relies heavily on accurate perspective. So what I do first is loosely place the windows and the patches of light on the floor, but pretty quickly I know I have to get the ruler out and get the perspective just right so that nothing about the image feels off when you initially look at it. But the world beyond isn't always explicitly shown. Often, Hammershoi gives a hint of the exterior through the light that shines in and projects an image of the window on the floor or wall. So I've set the overall idea and really shown the contrast of the light and the dark. I used this before on LBJ where I put the white painting down first and then I'll add additional things over the top, but it helps me remember, hey, keep this super, super light in relationship to everything else. Now, when using photographs, it's really difficult to use just one because the camera almost always wants to mess up the exposure and bleach out the lights to make them completely white and darken your darks to where they're just completely black if you can see what's in the outside. So your eye is really good at seeing both, and you almost have to use two images, which I took 2 photos at Fort Leaton, and that's what I'm doing right now. I want the light on the floor to feel very, very warm, so I make sure I put in a decent amount of yellow there. And I also want to layer my brushwork and drag the side of my brush across this white paint that I've already put in, because I want it to appear textured and to give the idea that it is that cobblestone surface. And you can see the lines of the light projected onto the ground aren't even straight because the floor is sunken and it's natural stone. So it's important to paint it in such a way that reveals that character. And when I get to the window, I'm a little overzealous in wanting to put in that azure sky that I'm seeing outside. But I quickly realized, no, I've got to have a lot of white in there because it needs to feel very, very light. Otherwise, it just reads as artificial. The same goes for the distant mountains and the plain in front of them. And putting it in the window on the left-hand side means that I have to be really careful about putting it in the doorway on the right. That horizon has to feel straight all the way through the scene. When I was renovating my home, I came across the refuge prospect theory. Described as the capacity to observe without being seen, the theory originally sought to explain why certain designs were pleasing. But that idea of refuge and prospect resonated with me. We all desire a place to retreat, to feel cozy, what the Danes would call hygge, or the Dutch call gezellig. And yet, we still love to have a window on the world. Our ideal then seems to be a room with a view. I've experienced this in a cabin in the UP of Michigan, in the Porkies mountain range, and I found it in the Three Fingers Lookout of Oregon. The wilderness is just beyond, but inside, I'm safe and warm. There's a beauty and an excitement in that, and I think Fort Leaton hints at that with a view of the Davis Mountains or the Chinati Mountains just beyond. And I've sped up the painting here so that you can see I'm still just focusing on the appearance of light. I'm trying to describe contrast when light is hitting and a shadow is being cast. Also trying to communicate that the light is very warm, and so it's got that yellowy kind of appearance on the door frame. When the light isn't quite as direct, the upward-facing plane is reflecting the blue of the sky, so it's much cooler. And it's really important to remember with opaque media that you can't mess it up. If I paint the shutter too far, I can simply mix the dark color up, put it on my brush, and paint the wall back over and constantly go back and forth like that. And then it's just filling in darkness around the scene so it looks complete next to the map on the other side. Of course, I couldn't resist putting in an indication of one of my favorite impressions from the scene. Where the cobblestones are worn smooth, they reflect the sky back a little bit more clearly, so you get these blue glints in among the floor. I hope I've captured something like what I feel when I look at a painting by Hammershoi. A stillness, a peace, but also a longing, a curiosity. The painting, I hope, becomes a space to explore. Well, as I said before, I'm on the edge of Big Bend Ranch State Park, and I can't wait to get to it. I will show you that in a future video. See you soon.